So welcome to the podcast. Today I am really grateful to have with me Dr. Rima Hussein. So would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be invited. So I am Palestinian academic working at Northumbria University, and I've been super active for a couple of years now in all walks of life for Palestine. So it's really great to come and have a conversation about that with you.
Thank you. And what I normally do with the guests is I ask them how did they get here. So I just
Mm.
wondered whether you could talk a little bit about your own personal journey, I guess, into activism. I don't know if you've always been an
Mm.
activist for Palestine, and then just a little bit about Palestinian history as well.
Oh, my journey. Well, my dad is Palestinian, and I grew up in different places in Kuwait and in New York, but a lot of the time was in England. And I think I was a little bit separate from the identity of being a Palestinian for quite a long time. Like, who am I? Where do I belong? Um, I've always had a focus on justice. My university work is all based on justice and looking at gendered violence and abuse. Um, and so I have had a little bit of activism in the past. I've joined a few marches and taken my kids when they were younger. But actually, what inspired me quite a lot is my brother. So he's been really active for more than 5 years.
Mhm.
And he does the bike ride for Palestine, the big ride.
Right, okay.
And he asked me to come down south and do the big ride. And I was on this bike with hundreds of riders. There was like 200 of us. And I realized there's this moment in this field with the sun shining, all these people spread out in front of me. And it's the first time I'd ever seen all the Palestinian colours
Mm.
just there. People proudly showing solidarity.
Mhm.
And there was Palestinian music playing. And it was a real moment of like landing into something of, ah, I'm here. Like there's this sense of community and home.
What year was that, Rima?
Oh, wow. That was around 4 years ago. Um, it was really beautiful and it struck me very strongly. And when I got home, I just went back to normal life. But when October the 7th happened, I knew that there would be massive ramifications
Hmm.
for Gazans, particularly.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, now's the time to step up. And so since then, I remember the first speech I did, it was like maybe November 2023, and it was in Sunderland, and my hands were shaking, and I had this speech prepared. And I told them it was the first time I'd ever spoken about Palestine. And by the time I did the second speech, a few hours later at Monument, I felt really confident. And it was like this voice in me that needed to be heard.
Yeah.
There's a power in that. And I felt like, ah, right, I'm here. There's a sense of like reclamation of my identity
Mhm.
to be able to speak to so many people. And I've can't lost count of how many times I've spoken now. Um, but it's very important for the listeners to know that it didn't start on October 7th.
Yeah.
That's one of the headlines that the propaganda wants you to believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my dad left Palestine in 1967 and he was about 11 years old.
Hmm.
And they'd already survived, his family, his ancestors had survived 1948, which was called the Nakba,
Yeah.
which means the catastrophe. And that's when 750,000 Palestinians were kind of pushed out of their land. They had to be refugees. And then when my dad was 11, 300,000 were pushed out.
Was that around Jerusalem, around there, or was it
Well, my dad's family, well, it was all over,
all over?
but my dad's family comes from a place called Hawara, which is by a city called Nablus, and it's a flashpoint. It's known as a real stronghold of Palestinian identity. And they left because my grandma heard that in a nearby village there'd been a massacre.
Right.
And it's like, we go now,
Yeah.
we don't have time to get anything, we just leave. So they packed up what they could and they went in the back of a like truck with tarpaulin pulled over. And she never really spoke about this with me, actually. But my uncle told me he would have been about, I don't know, 7. he said his job was to keep the milk urn upright because the littlest one was about 2, so they needed to have
Milk.
milk, and
So
that
where
was
did
his
they
memory.
go? Where did they, what was their journey?
So they journeyed to Kuwait,
Hmm.
and I guess the route would have probably been through um, Jordan and Iraq, so
Yeah.
quite a long journey. And that was a time when there was no phones, no mobile phones. So they didn't. My grandma's husband, my granddad, was working in Kuwait, but he didn't know where they were, and they couldn't contact him. So he was searching like the refugee camps for them,
Wow.
and managed to
So
find them.
your granddad was working in Kuwait, so your grandma took the kids and just so that
Yeah,
mother's instinct to
yeah,
just go.
yeah.
Wow.
Go to find her husband. Yeah,
Whew.
yeah, massive.
And then they ended up where after that?
So they lived in Kuwait for a lot of years.
Mhm.
So my dad grew up there. But then Palestinians really value education. It's like one of the kind of cornerstones.
Yeah.
So he sent all his sons off to either the US or the UK to get really good educations. So my dad ended up here, met my mum, and then had me. So he doesn't live in the UK right now. He lives in Jordan,
Right,
which is
okay.
right next to occupied West Bank.
Hmm.
And so it's like in touching distance, and he can see it if he
Mm.
travels a little. But none of them have been able to go back and live in Palestine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And I guess could you just touch on a little bit of the history of
Mm.
Palestine for the listeners, for
Mm.
those, because there is a lot of misinformation,
There
a lot
is.
of propaganda. It's
Yeah,
crazy out there.
there's a
Yeah.
lot. Okay. So even before 1948, there'd been this agreement. It's called the Balfour Declaration, which happened around 1917, which promised the land of Palestine for a Jewish state. And the phrase at the time was, it's a nation with no people for a people without a nation. So it's like the idea is it's an empty land we're giving
Right.
to you. There's nobody there. It's free for you. That obviously wasn't the reality. But between 1917 and 1948, it's a British mandated area, Palestine. And what was actually happening was the Zionists who wanted this state of Israel were bringing in as many people as they could into Palestine because the population was mainly Palestinians.
Mhm.
There were not many Jews, but the Jews that were there lived really harmoniously with Muslims, Christians. It was a beautiful place to be. But over time, they knew that ratio had to change of population. Um, and in 1948, the State of Israel was declared. But what I would say, there's a great deal of violence. It was created out of violence, lots of murders, lots of villages occupied and erased, very much like what we're seeing in Gaza right now.
Yeah.
So, murders, assassinations, villages razed to the ground so that people could not return. And really, we say the word genocide now, but it's been an ongoing, like the Nakba of 1948 never really ended because ever since then, Palestinians have been living in conditions which are inhumane. They can't leave when they want to. In Gaza, in particular, the sea is controlled, so they can only fish a certain number of miles. And anything coming in is really it's obviously at the worst possible place right now. But even before this, they'd say that Gazans were in some level of starvation because it only allows something like 1,200 calories in a day per person that lived there. The water is being stolen all the time. Um,
What from the aquifers?
yeah, from the wells, so the
Right.
natural water resources, Palestinians are only allowed a fraction of the water compared to what the mainland Israelis use.
Right.
Um, the wild knowledge of Palestinians has attempted to be destroyed in that, for example, there's this amazing plant called za'atar, and it's really important to Palestinians and it grows wild everywhere. And there's now a law that, Palestinians are not allowed to pick wild za'atar. It's almost like trying to remove everything that makes them
Yeah.
Palestinian.
That's how you do. That's
Yeah.
how you were raised, isn't it? Because it happened to you. Like it's gone. It's colonialism. It's kind of you erase a language, you erase the people, you take away their traditions. The same as what happened in Scotland when
Yeah,
the English did it. It's similar thing, isn't it? You
yeah,
can't allow people to have the medicinal plants and herbs and
yeah.
song and music and yeah.
All of that. And you might have seen this recent, for the listeners, they might have seen fires recently in on mainland Israel. And that's because they've cut down so many olive trees because the olive tree is this emblem of Palestinians, and they've replaced it with the trees they want to put in, which can't stand the heat,
Yeah.
and therefore there's been these wildfires. Well, what you'll always see is indigenous people look after the land and
Yeah.
colonizers destroy it. And Palestinians, even now in Gaza, I saw a video yesterday of a man growing tomatoes in one of the few little areas still growing things. Third time he's tried it, the other two times the soldiers came and destroyed it
Wow.
because they want anything that sustains life to be destroyed. That's why the bakeries were bombed. That's why the medical personnel are bombed. It's, to such a degree that, yeah, they don't want anything that could sustain life to be left.
What would you say to the people that are still talking about October the 7th or Hamas, or as if
Mm,
there's some semblance of a justification
mm,
to what has happened? Because I get so angry that I actually can't talk.
mm. I understand that. I've been faced with it quite a number of times. And sometimes I walk away actually, because sometimes there's no reasoning with
Yeah.
something. But what I come back to every time is there's a UN resolution which says that occupied people have a right to resist, even if that means taking up arms. Now, what I say to an ordinary person is if you were in a kind of prison where the air and the sea is controlled and how much food you can eat is controlled, would you want to continue living like that, or would you want to try and break out of it? And that's essentially what they tried to do on October 7th. The headlines, the mainstream media are really, there's so much propaganda. The ordinary person in the street is fed up of living under occupation. And that's why South Africa has been so vocal,
Yeah, of
because
course.
they understand apartheid. They understand that what they're seeing in Palestine is apartheid. You know, being on separate roads, not being able to walk down a street because you're Palestinian, going through like checkpoints where you wait for hours, where you might have a job that you need to get to, but you're standing for hours like cattle. All of these markers of an apartheid have been recognised for quite a while now. So when someone comes to me with October the 7th, I just say, open your eyes,
Yeah.
do your own reading. Because if you're trusting BBC or mainstream media, who are kind of really silent on the reality, you're not getting the full picture, and you actually need to go to the journalists on the ground, the Palestinian people
Mhm.
themselves, because they're shouting it from the rooftops, even though more than 200 of them have been murdered, assassinated, because they don't want the truth tellers to be doing their job. So if you look around, it's there. And that's what I'd really say, that we're stuck in this very narrow idea of this um, button being pressed and start of time is that. Well, no, can go back 100 years actually. And it's a great injustice because this has been playing out for generation after generation. My grandma, hoped that she would see a free Palestine. My dad hopes he will. I know there'll be a free Palestine. It's just when.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I try to rather than getting stuck in this narrow channel they're trying to take me
Yeah.
down, I try and step back and
Step back. Yeah.
ask critical questions and
Yeah.
yeah.
I saw a really interesting Instagram the other day, that just nailed what I've been feeling, thinking like in my body for a while. And I remember being at school learning about what happened in Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. Mum used to take me as a child on the anti-apartheid, free Nelson Mandela marches. And so kind of as a young age, I was quite political, like,
Mm-hmm.
come on this poll tax man. And so she was obsessed with World War II, and so all the movies and the books and everything. And so as a kid, I was kind of like aware of everything that happened and horrified and just really curious. And I remember being in class and just not understanding. I was like, how can humans do this to each other? How can people be brainwashed, be there, and asking these really deep questions? And my history teacher was like showing us the photos, and he's like, it is propaganda, it
Mm,
is dehumanization.
mhm,
And now seeing what I'm seeing as the parallels are
mm,
just the way I can hear it in the BBC. It's like Hamas run hospitals when they're
mm,
reporting about people being killed, not, oh, actually, that was 50 children and babe. And then listening to how differently they report and say, like, Russia, Ukraine, where they're like, Russia's done. And I'm like, whoa, because you can feel and see the programming, but only if you're aware of it. And
mm,
that's what this podcast is around freeing yourself from the matrix, freeing yourself from these programs that exist. And seeing it out now, I'm like, whoa, this is how it happened then, and this is happening now.
mm,
And seeing some of, I think one of the most alarming things I saw this week was Israelis behind like the concentration camp wall, and behind it are, 2 million people being starved to death, and they were having a barbecue and playing
mm,
music
mm,
and singing and allowing the smell. And I was like, can you imagine
mm,
those children and babies, like all the people, no matter who they are, I'm not going to kind of
mm,
just being there and smelling that and just thinking,
mm.
instead of helping,
Yeah.
like, how I actually feel more sorry for the Israelis than I do the Palestinians, because how does your soul ever come back from that?
Yeah, there's a loss of humanity right there.
Yeah.
And being the victimhood that sort of clouds this fear they must be living to think that they need to kill every living person in Gaza to be safe. How can you make yourself safe by killing more and more
Yeah.
and more people? And they've also been raiding the aid trucks and stopping them going
Saw it.
in.
It's awful.
And they've been watching from rooftops with binoculars, the bombs hitting and celebrating.
Cheering. Oh, there's some children blown up into the
Yeah,
air. Like, oh,
yeah,
there's another terrorist. And like,
yeah.
how?
And one that struck me was like, how you get a cake for a gender reveal. They bombed with the colour of the baby that the soldier that was pressing the bomb, they were about to have that baby. So the bomb was like a pink colour, and it's like, oh, I'm having a baby girl. But you've just blown up some people.
It's like a video game.
Oh, it is. It's very removed from all that we hold dear. And I think that's the real biggest concern for me, that international law, there's a reason for that. And it goes back to the Second World War and having some rules and a world order that means that we recognize something when it's happening and we said never again. And all of those things are being ripped up every day by, well, our UK government allowing a
Mm-hmm.
partner of theirs, Israel, to continue this barbarity and this genocide and not standing with international law.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's astounding. It really is.
Yeah, for me, it blew. I thought, because when it first started happening, it was under the Tories, wasn't it? It was Rishi Sunak. And I thought, oh, if we get a change of government, they might do something,
Mm-hmm.
with Keir Starmer being a human rights lawyer.
Mm,
And then I was like, okay, wow. And obviously in America, it was Joe Biden who was left
mm,
wing. It was happening under him. And now we've
yeah.
got Trump. So it really shows the rot that exists across every political party. And I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes, but why?
Mm.
Like,
I think you have to follow the funding trails. You
yeah.
really do. So APAC in the US has massive clout. They financially support people to win,
Mm-hmm.
in Congress, and will do smear campaigns against anyone who stands for anything else. In the UK, I don't think that's dissimilar. In terms of the Labour Party, have taken a lot of Zionist
Mm-hmm.
lobby money. Um, and Keir Starmer has flip-flopped, always flip-flopped on issues, even though he's meant to be a human rights lawyer. And we can see that recently with the Farage kind of stuff, the comments he's been making. So I think it is about the power of that lobby. But the thing is, when you stand firm with your values for humanity, you can't be bought.
No.
And there's a great power in that.
Mm-hmm.
So what, the 500,000 people on the streets last weekend in London
Yeah.
marching together, you know, there's power that they can't even imagine in those people coming together. And everywhere I look, there are people taking action, whether it's lobbying their MP or boycotting
Mm-hmm.
products, um, or taking more direct action, like at the factory,
Mm-hmm.
you
Do you
know.
want to talk a little bit about that?
I'd love to, because you know what, those two, well, there's another action a couple of days
Back
ago.
it up a bit.
Yeah.
For the listeners, if we're not, I
Yeah,
know
of
what you're
course.
talking
Yes, you
about,
do, you know.
but a lot of people won't know
Yeah,
that
yeah,
there is in Newcastle.
yeah. In Newcastle, there's a factory and it says Pearson Engineering on it and it has a Union Jack, but it's actually been bought by Raphael, which is an arms manufacturer that is Israeli government owned.
Whoa, I didn't know that bit actually.
Right. So we literally have an Israeli factory on our doorstep.
Isn't that treason under some law somewhere?
I'm sure there's some law somewhere, but since the laws aren't being applied, it's a big, massive stain on our city. And there's now been 3 actions against it by Palestine Action, which is an organisation that believes in not pleading or begging our politicians anymore, but just taking action to the door
Yeah.
of these factories. And so you might see headlines where things have been splattered red paint. That's their marker. So the first action was a few years ago. The second action was only about 4 months ago, 5 months ago, when 2 of our PSC branch members got up on the entrance tower of the factory and they held the factory for hours and hours and hours, which meant that people couldn't get into the factory to do their jobs, to create more of the weapon parts. And yeah, amazing action. And then there was an action a few days ago where they poured red paint all over the entrance of the factory, and it's to highlight that so many people don't know this factory is literally there, and parts from this factory are going into planes, going into tanks, and that factory is directly involved in what's happening in Gaza. So it's massive, and we've been highlighting it. And it's interesting with the idea of propaganda because they hide behind this Pearson Engineering banner and this Union Jack. You know, they don't identify who they are.
Yeah.
But when you do the research, and it's not too hard to do,
It's actually
it all
really,
links
so it's
back.
got nothing to do with the Union Jack.
No.
Wow. I know, because I got really, because there's a big push in the UK to be nationalistic.
Mm.
And really, if you are going to be like that, why would you allow a foreign government
Mm.
to manufacture? It's just,
Mm.
it's not right, is it? If you think about the whole premise of World War II and what we were fighting for, like freedom and not, it's just wrong. And there's also this, British citizens that have gone to fight for the Israeli army that have then
Oh,
come back.
yes.
That is absolutely treasonous. So if you're
Yeah.
talking about nationalism,
Yeah.
they should all be in jail, really. And I definitely know that there's laws around that. And just
Yeah.
from a moral level, like why would you allow our own citizens to go out and fight for somebody else's army? Like it's just
Absolutely.
messed up.
And there is action being taken against those individuals who've gone out to fight and come back by centres like the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians. They
Right.
literally have dossiers against individuals who've gone to do that. And there's a lot of legal action happening actually, but it's not quick through the courts.
No, I can imagine.
And we actually need an about turn in government policy. They need to recognise Palestine first of all.
Yeah.
And they need to stop the arms being sent because it's all well and good David Lammy standing there saying, this has gone too far now. Well, this is 19 months later.
Yeah.
So we need words to mean something.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see is a lot of theatrics and a lot of stage management. And in reality, they're still sending people over to Israel to talk about trade.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need it to mean something.
Yeah, I saw Richard Bergen's been really strong. There's a few MPs that have been really, you can tell that they are not being able to be bought or so, and they are really strong in their convictions. Like,
Oh my
really
God,
good.
yes. Zara Sultana,
Yeah.
obviously Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, that's why he got ousted. Do you remember for anti-Semitism? But
Yeah,
really, all he was doing was standing up for Palestine. So
yeah,
I was like, whoa, when you look at probably there's a grand plan that's been played out.
Mm,
They obviously couldn't allow him to be leader of this country, standing up for
mm.
humanity the way that he has, and so they ousted him. But really, when you look at it, it wasn't really anti-Semitic at all, was it? He was just standing up against Zionism.
This anti-Semitism thing's a big one. A lot of people are afraid of being called anti-Semitic just from standing up for Palestinian human rights
Yeah.
and talking about dehumanization, etc. And it's really tricky because there will be anti-Semitism, genuine anti-Semitism, but the fact that it's used continuously when there's a genuine critique of the state of Israel
Yeah.
means that actual anti-Semitism is being downplayed
Mm-hmm.
and it's being weaponized against things that are not. And it's become really messy, I think. And I think that we need to not be afraid, actually, to speak out loud what we see, what we hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason, one of the reasons the Holocaust could happen, too many good people were silent.
Yeah.
Like your neighbour was silent about what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we can afford for that to happen anymore, particularly because this is televised.
Yeah.
We can wake up in the morning and see, like, you probably saw the story this week about the doctor who went to work, her husband gave her a lift. Yeah. And she has 10 children. And her husband gave her a lift and got home again. And then there was a bomb, and 9 of her children have been killed. And her husband's in intensive care, and there's one child that's alive. And this is a woman who is starving, who's going to work every day in hospital, where they can only do so much now.
Was that the last hospital that was remaining as well?
There's very few hospitals remaining.
Yeah.
There's maybe perhaps 1 or 2. Because there's been bombs dropped. There's all kinds of things going on. And for the listeners, I was going to say readers, but the listeners, this might be really hard to listen to. And I know I'm just saying it really fluidly, but that's because I've been living it every day for 19 months. And each story has such meaning. But then before you can even grieve that story, the next one happens. And so every day has been the worst day. I remember one of my speeches, I said, every day is the worst day. And I went through all the stories and it just keeps getting worse. And I couldn't have imagined I'd be sitting here now still talking about this. Yeah.
Like, what are they doing? Like, how are they targeting these people? Because I remember this, she was also a doctor and she'd given birth to twins and she was in this building. And so her husband went out. They'd announced on social media, or doctor, I can't remember her name, I'm really sorry. But she'd announced they were having these beautiful twins in the middle of this occupation and genocide that was ongoing. She'd given birth healthily. He was ecstatic, gone to register the birth certificate, and Israel targeted the apartment where they were in, and that is how sophisticated the
Oh,
weaponry
yeah.
is. So I asked, the AI on the internet, what are they using? And they said, yeah, they gave me a name and I can't remember what it was, but they're using this sophisticated, because it's the most sophisticated technology and advanced weaponry in the entire world.
It is.
And so they can actually, what they're doing is using social media accounts for their targets, like military targets, but really, that's not Hamas leaders and rebellions. This is nurses and doctors and journalists, and they are now the targets because they're speaking the truth, or they
Yeah.
didn't want to celebrate, new light. And it all week I was thinking, can you imagine that man's grief coming back from elation to that? Like,
Yeah.
it's very similar to the doctor this week, and
It
just the
is.
stories and stories and stories. And then there was the 2 lovely women, these Christian women that had that church that had been going from, the days of Jesus, because these are Jesus Christ's like descendants, aren't they? Everyone's like, oh, but they're Muslim, but actually they're the same people. Like, it doesn't matter what religion they have now. It's like they are the descendants of Christ and they've kept this little church alive, and then they got sniped. And I was just like, so this isn't actually Jews against Muslims. This is
Mm.
something else entirely, isn't it?
It is. It's painted as that, as a religious war, but it's actually a Zionist ideology.
Yeah.
And that people need to understand that. the Muslim people are inherently peaceful, generous. I mean, I don't know how many Palestinians your listeners will know, but if you do know them, you'll know that they would give you anything. They would make you a meal, they'd make you eat too much, you'd be saying no more, and they'd be saying have more. And it's just this warmth and this heart. And if you've been seeing any of the journalists or artists or any of the people sharing from Gaza, the cyclists who've been going round, the surf club that have still been trying to help, kids in camps, there's Gaza Circus. These people are so alive in that situation, and they carry, there's a word, sumud, and it's all about resilience, no matter what. And they carry this amazing strength and heart. So they are natural storytellers. So you will hear the stories of these people that have been martyred. That's what they would say, been martyred, and they're in a better place. You'll hear the stories, their dreams, their hopes, very human. And it's so bonkers because they're being dehumanized constantly in the West. And yet these people are absolute gold. They'd give anything to anyone. And if you were hungry, they would share what little they had with you, even though it's barely anything. And that's what people need to know about Palestinians. And if they've met a Palestinian, they will know that's true. Because no matter what, they survive. But they deserve more than that.
Yeah, they do.
They really deserve to have what we have. They deserve to be able to go and see their family and not be separated from them, and to have an education. I'm an educator, and for me, every university's been bombed in Gaza. There's not one left standing. And there's been students having their vivas for their PhDs in tents. And there's been teachers holding classes in tents. They're so creative and inventive, and they shouldn't have to be. But I'm in awe of what they do every single day.
Wow. What's your doctorate in, Rima?
So it's a Doctor of Philosophy, but my PhD was very different to what I do now.
Sorry, that was a very uneducated way of
asking. No, it's fine. It wasn't at all. It was looking at a charity and looking at the decisions they were making and looking at ethical decision making. Mm-hmm. Is what I did then. But in later years, I've shifted to looking at gendered violence and abuse. Right. So I co-lead a big research group in Northumbria. There's about 94 scholars doing amazing work in different areas. Mm-hmm. But mine's all about the family courts in England and Wales, right, and how people are treated. And then, state violence and colonial violence is a kind of higher picture, which is happening in the UK in different ways as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to make a point about the men actually in Palestine. We talk a lot about women sometimes and children, and that's how the media wants to portray things. And what I've noticed when I'm watching footage is how kind and generous the men are. So they're always painted as terrorists, actually, and dehumanized. But I'll see men hugging each other and consoling each other, praying together, sharing food, searching through the rubble together. There's all these amazing things they're doing every day. And I think there's not enough said about the men, actually, because they're really holding so much on their shoulders. And there's this family that I follow. Basil is the dad's name. They've got two little girls, Lulu and Mira, and they've had to move 10 times. So they've been given these evacuation orders. Every time they need to put a new tent up, there's 10 family members. And food prices have gone insane in Gaza. So your listeners might not know that. But to buy an onion is $12. And it's how can you afford anything? How can you afford to have a meal? So people have been eating literally grass, animal feed. It's starvation to the max right now. Yeah, and it's the men and women holding it together. I don't know how they're actually continuing, the children as well in the face of everything.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it in about the men, because I think that gorgeous young journalist, the one where there's lovely footage of the little girl saying, "I thought you were martyred." Was it Hassan? I think his name was. just, and how you say how they were coming together and the fighting through the rubble. It's just, yeah. And then I watched this thing the other day with this elderly professor, and he was sitting there and he'd been given a meal and he was crying. Just these young lads that had come in and they were just helping him. And I was like, wow, just what's been going on since I've been a kid. Uh, the dehumanization of Muslims in culture, and yeah, like Muslim gangs obviously exist. I was almost part of them when I was a little kid. But we don't talk about paedophilia in the church or in the whole family, or there are dodgy people doing dodgy things regardless of. But it's then and then the biggest issue now on reform is people in boats. But actually, if we didn't have such awful foreign policy, people wouldn't have to leave their. So it's all this. I don't know. I just see it playing out, and I'm like, all these little pieces that come together to be able to dehumanize. I went to Turkey and Morocco this year, and I didn't really get a sense of solidarity with Palestine with Turkey. I asked a few questions, but people were just really. It was really weird to observe. But in Morocco, there was lots of flags and the taxi drivers, and I feel like culturally they're quite similar. Morocco and just they're just really alive. Like everyone's really alive in the street, and there's just the food, and everyone's really welcoming. And everyone told me that I should be really, really unsafe there, and I shouldn't travel on my own. And it's bullshit. I had a really lovely time, and I was held more there. I had a lot of grief, and I was held by these strangers, these beautiful women, and I just had the most amazing, experience. And yeah, just
Yeah.
where I've gone off on a tangent
No, I
about
hear
that.
you. I hear you. I think that they've done a really good job of like telling us untruths that have become the story in the main headlines. And actually, people are human at the end of the day. And you're right about gangs. When there's a lone white bomber in the US, they don't label them anything. They'll say it's a lone bomber. If it's a man of Muslim descent, he's a terrorist, he's part of a terrorist gang. Yeah, it's scary how common that is now become. And it's time for it all to be lifted. In a way, this has unmasked to the highest degree
Yeah.
what's really happening in the corridors of power. In all kinds of organizations. When people are attacking UN staff, when UN staff are killed, when UN staff are being called anti-Semitic,
Yeah.
like Francesca Albanese, who's the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied territories, is turned away from Germany and has to change location because there's German police in the room, armed police, while she's giving her speech. What are they so scared of? They're scared of us actually knowing that they can't divide us anymore and conquer us. They can't pit people in poverty against people walking the streets of Palestine, because we're actually together in solidarity. It's the people in power who want us to believe that. And those people in boats, they're only here because we're invading their countries and the effect we've had and what we've stolen from them.
Yeah.
So I think it's all there to be seen. And it does take some work to get to that point, definitely. But we've got more information than we've ever had.
Can I just ask you why? Why are they? Is it just for land?
There is usually something to plunder. And in a way, if you think about it, Israel as it's now formed is like um, there for America. So it's actually really US having a foothold in what they call the Middle East. I mean, there's army bases everywhere anyway, but yeah, land, having a foothold there. There is meant to be gas. I think there's all kinds of factors. There's been talk about having another kind of canal and trade route.
Okay.
So there's all these kinds of ideas around what it is. But I think the bigger plan, if you ever listen to Netanyahu, I don't call him Netanyahu. That's not his real name, by the way.
His real name?
So he's called Malachowski. So he changed his name to sound more like he belongs there. And
Where's he from?
I think I might be really wrong with this, but I think his dad might have been Polish. His dad was called Ben Zion Malachowski. If you listen to him speak, he talks about not just the whole of Palestine, which they're now trying to take in the West Bank as well. Um, but you know, parts of Egypt, parts of Jordan, you know, and a bigger like plan. And he shows maps like in public and talks in public about, you know, he said something this week that everyone was like shocked by. I'm not really shocked anymore. But he said, "Oh, we're not starving them. We got a load of them detained. We stripped them of all their clothes. They weren't thin. They don't even exercise." You know, at what level is this going to get to before people are like, and now stop? That's enough is enough, actually. That's where I'm at in my
Yeah.
head. So wherever I go now, like try asking me questions that ask me to condemn this or that or the other or Hamas, because there's a fire that I've
Yeah.
got in me that means that um I'm just driving towards change and action, and like nothing's going to get in the way of that. And there's so many people who are in the same place.
That you just got this fire in your
Yeah,
belly.
got this fire and we're together in community. And Newcastle's been one of the most active branches for Palestine solidarity. And we've done like hundreds and hundreds of actions, whether it's like a die-in at the central station, or whether it's a sit and like the encampment at the university, which was just extraordinary. Um, all the protests, the marches, we've had people come and talk to us. We've had Loki. I don't know if your listeners know Loki, but he was wrapping up Monument, which was quite a moment. Um, so we brought all these people here, and there's an energy. There's like a buzz. So we know what's happening, but we're just going to keep working,
Yeah, of
and we're going to
course.
keep chipping away, and we're going to do what we can. And the ripple effect can be quite extraordinary. It really can, and I believe in it. So I don't sink into the grief like I can, and I have moments where I do, but it doesn't serve me, and it doesn't serve my family, and doesn't serve Palestine to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I like hold that like grief and that fire, and I use it for action and memento, and that's the way that I do it. And I also very much lean towards hope and optimism.
Mm-hmm.
Like I believe in good, and I believe the good will always shine through.
I really loved what you said about turning that anger um into action, because I
Mm,
think, because from a spiritual level, I've been like watching a lot and reading a lot about when you're seeing a genocide or something like this playing out and you can't do anything, actually, if you're in constant outrage and anger and or in that grief, actually that energy can be harvested. You know, this idea that we are living in some kind of matrix and that whatever our vibe is. So the fact that you're taking that and converting it within you and then turning it into action is absolutely super powerful. It's really inspirational. Um, so how can normal people, listeners to this, anyone get involved to help like you've been doing? What are the small things that people do to make changes?
Oh, there's so many things that can be done. So I guess the first thing is to have chats with people close to you and actually call it what it is and
Yeah,
be able to have some difficult conversations. Now, you know, that might not have been easy at the start, but now we're 19 months in,
yeah,
there's so many stories we can draw on to show the inhumanity and to talk about the power of truth
yeah.
and coming together in community. You could join a rally or a march, like we do a lot of them in Newcastle. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. It's on Instagram, it's Newcastle PSC, and we have so much happening. It's like, wow, you know, you've
Mm,
got such a choice.
yeah.
Um, Sometimes there's other communities like Women in Black who stand in silence in Tynemouth,
Hmm.
and they stand on the main shopping street in Tynemouth with signs saying, you know, peace and all children matter and things like that.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say is that you have a way of being involved no matter where you were at.
Hmm.
So you may be really comfortable standing outside the factory when there's a lot of police. You might not be. You might instead want to do more individual things. So something I've done for a lot of years is boycotting. And there's something called the BDS movement. So if your listeners look that up, it's Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement. And it's boycotting companies who are investing in Israel or complicit in some way in this genocide. So using our financial power, because at the end of apartheid in South Africa, there's a lot of work going on together, but it was the financial hits
I remember, yeah.
that meant that things changed. So Coca-Cola is actually something we need to boycott. Loads of different brands, McDonald's,
Starbucks.
Zara, Starbucks. The website will tell you lots about them, and there's some amazing apps. So I can never keep all the knowledge in my head, but there's an app called No Thanks,
Yeah.
and if I just put, I don't know, like Zara in,
Mm-hmm.
it'll come up with don't buy there, and this is the reason, and here's the link you can read about.
Wow. So we can put the links in for that on this
Yeah,
podcast. That'd be
that'd
really
be
helpful.
amazing.
Did you see that Co-op have banned all Israeli products?
Yeah, so they passed a motion, but it's not got to happen. So now we need to
Okay.
push for them to implement it fully.
Ah, right. I didn't realize
Yeah.
that. I thought that had
But a
fully
vote
passed.
passed. A
Right,
vote did
okay.
pass. And now we need to make sure they
They actually
back it
do
up.
it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, I keep on the hopeful side. There's a lot of amazing, amazing things happening.
Mm-hmm.
So on the student encampment side of things, because I do some research on that, the University of Cambridge, King's College is just will be divesting completely from Israel by the end of the year.
It's amazing.
And there's like amazing trade union movements across the world.
Yeah.
There's been workers, ordinary workers, at docks saying, no, we're not having this ship dock here with arms that are going to Israel. And, standing in the way, Spain's just cut ties completely and all arms sales. So, like, I feel the tide is turning.
Mm-hmm.
Where I might not have had like an audience listening to me before around certain subjects, they are now. And there's people that we wouldn't think would stand up for Palestine who are now starting to.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad to see that tide turning.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Lineker is one of them, actually. He's really said a lot about
Yeah.
Palestine, and then the BBC have given him his marching orders. And I think it's interesting for us to look at our institutions when you're talking about the matrix and like really seeing they've got a lot of conservative politicians on their board. And if you look at the language you talked about before, where like Israelis will be murdered, but Palestinians will have died, and they'll talk about hostages, but they won't talk about all the thousands of kids in Israeli jails who are also hostages. They're prisoners.
Yeah.
And so what we can also do is really be critical and really think who's writing this, who for and why, and really start to access that independent media. There's amazing reporters from Palestine.
Did you see the Tony Bennett's interview? One of his last ones that he gave was about Palestine, and there'd been 1,000 people killed. I can't even remember what year it was, but because he's got this really posh voice and he comes from the establishment, she was talking and everything she said he was picking apart. And he was like, why have you just said that? And he's like, I appreciate there are many Zionist lobbies who are influencing how you're doing this interview, but I am standing for you. And he wouldn't give her an inch. And I thought that is what we need to be doing. And that's what the politicians of today need to be doing as well. It's like not allowing them to have this kind of way of speech. But yeah, he just literally wiped the floor with her. It was amazing to witness.
Tony Benn's one of my idols. I met Tony Benn once. He was in Newcastle doing a talk, and he signed my book. And I remember him holding my hand and looking me in the eyes and saying, keep doing what you're doing, it's important. And it is those interviews where someone has really like pulled the veil off what's really happening that stand out, I think. And that's what we need to do, is need to speak truth to power. So whether that's talking in our workplace to people, talking to our family members, who we bank with, like Barclays is like what the official bank for Israel. It like bankrolls Israel. It provides all kinds of cover for Israel. So there's a massive PSC campaign against Barclays. But there's lots of other banks like Santander as well.
My mortgage is with them. It was the only one I could get it with. As soon as I could.
Some people are in that situation. But we can talk to like our kids' schools. We can talk to our workplaces. Banding together, that's how things change. We sometimes go into stores as a branch and like tell customers about the products. There's so many things happening. There's films that star in shadow. There's one actually next week on Tuesday where there's going to be a series of short films. We've done a walk down the Tyne and fundraised. And there's a kite flying at the weekend in Newcastle and Hexham. So really creative things you can get involved in. And do you know what though? One of the most powerful things is to wear something visible. So I've got a watermelon badge on here. I'm a keffiyeh. This is a traditional scarf, and there's one remaining factory in Palestine that produces them. So maybe we could drop the link in as well.
That would be awesome. I'd really like. And tell me more about the history and the symbolism of the keffiyeh.
Yeah, so the keffiyeh is used to be worn by farmers to protect them when they're in the fields, and by fishermen as well. So it's got like fishing net design on it. And this came to be in the 80s a symbol of resistance. It's tried to be appropriated by Israeli fashion designers and other people, but it's remained as one of the most visible ways that you can show that you're with Palestine. So I wear mine. I've got different colours. People recognize this very strongly. So people will come up and say to you, "Oh, you're wearing that scarf." It's the surest way to find another nice person. It's like wear it in public or look out for one.
Love it.
Yeah. And the watermelon is very symbolic because at some point Israel banned Palestinians from flying the Palestine flag or doing anything in the colours. So they started painting watermelons because it's got the same colours as the flag. And so you'll see watermelons all over. I've got keffiyeh earrings in as well. I try and be loud and proud, like that visibility wherever I am in the workplace, in the supermarket, feels crucial, especially for other Palestinians who I know are like might have family there, might have lost so many people. Some of my closest friends have lost over 100 people. And I just want to show up in every way possible. And sometimes it's just asking a Palestinian, like, how are you? Or like not even how are you, because that's quite a hard one. Should we get some food? Do you want to have a cuppa? Give them a hug.
Just I'm here.
Checking in. Yeah. And that's what we did a lot of on the encampment. It was like a community. It was a safe place. We could go and cry on the days where those awful things were happening, but we could also eat together and having joy as resistance too, being able to be happy in moments. Because I thought at one point, I don't know how to be happy anymore. But actually, being alive is to have that. And you'll see in Palestinians when they share, there's young kids doing like recipes online and people drawing and singing. Some of the people who've been singing have really touched me. Like the journalists sometimes at the end of the day would sit together and sing, all the men. So they show us life all the time. And they're our biggest teachers, actually. They've like shown the world all these interconnected issues and what's really happening. And I think we can run with those lessons.
That was one of the biggest things. I've forgotten how to say his name. Motaz.
Yeah.
He came out and he was like, "This isn't real life out here. It's real life back in there because it is. It's rich and it's full, and it might be the most hideous conditions, but these people are real." And I was like, "Whoa!" I remember seeing a video that he did. What else I was going to ask you? If somebody just, they might not necessarily want to kind of join a protest, is there something they can just do, like sign a petition, write to the MP? Do all those things matter as well, do you feel?
I think it does, because if you write a personal letter or email to your MP, it hits differently than those like tools where you can write your name and it's automatic. The Northeast MPs haven't been particularly fantastic. I mean, we've lobbied them quite hard. And our Newcastle MP has been horrendous, to be honest, on this issue. But they need to know the feeling from the public.
Yeah.
So even if it doesn't shift them a lot, they still know their constituents care about that issue. Speaking to councillors is really important. So we had some action at Newcastle City Council. We had a petition of 4,000 people asking for them to call out what was happening, and they didn't at that point.
Is this the Albert, do you mean? Or
no, this is that's come later, the kind of factory related stuff. But first of all, it was just, we're a city of sanctuary. Can you say this isn't okay? And at first they sort of kept a very political line, but then later they did, and they said we need a ceasefire and we need it now.
That's good.
So we keep up the pressure in different ways, and you do see change. Things are not static. Sometimes I know it can feel quite hopeless and like, how am I one person going to change anything? But actually, I remember like Rosa Parks saying no that day. And yeah, lots of work had come before that.
Mm-hmm.
But her no that day caused a massive ripple
Mm-hmm.
that changed everything.
Yeah.
And so, every day getting up and standing up for what you believe in, even if it's a small thing like not buying Israeli products that day, because a lot of supermarkets are stocking them. So always check, where your dates are from, uh,
Avocados, your hummus.
avocados, hummus. And hummus is a big one because they try and make it look like it's Palestinian. So that's why the app's really good because you can literally scan the barcode and it tells you.
Yeah, my friends came in the summer, and my friends she's half Iranian,
Mm.
and so she's kind of she was like, you can't buy that hummus. So I was, damn, it's my favorite hummus, but yeah, it's the
Was it
appropriation of
Sabra
it.
hummus?
It was,
Yeah,
yeah.
I knew it was.
It's the only one without, because I try not to have seed oils and it's got olive oil in it, but there's just so, when you think about it, there is just so much wrong with that.
Yeah,
Appropriating
yeah,
the indigenous people's food whilst
yeah.
and in their it's just, yeah,
It's on so many levels appropriation,
so
whether
many
it's
levels,
the
it's wrong.
kefir or the hummus, the food. It's at all levels, um, and they've done it very effectively, and they've done a very effective job in the West. Um, to be seen as a friend and to be seen as a democracy,
I know, it's
and
crazy.
really, I have seen now a lot of Israelis in protest against Netanyahu, and the amount of Jewish people that are on the marches in London, the amount of Jewish allies. I've spoken to so many Jewish people who stand beside me, um, and that's crucial. This is a cross section of the public that care and are showing up. And no matter what religion we are, or we stand up for humanity because we said never again and we mean never again, no matter who that is. um
It's really powerful. Yeah, you
yeah,
were saying before about like the Holocaust survivors, like they
yeah,
must be, because I watched them and just had like full body shivers
yeah,
of them talking about the parallels and then saying like not in my name.
yeah.
Like it's so powerful. Have you been on marches with them as well?
I haven't managed to get to a London one because of kids.
Yeah.
But there were Jewish allies at the encampment,
Mm-hmm.
and there are Jewish allies in the movement in the Northeast. And some of the most powerful videos have been the Holocaust survivors with their signs. And a rabbi came to visit Newcastle and gave a speech. And I remember sitting there really shocked because he was talking about we should never have taken that land. We're not meant to take that land. And this is a travesty and this needs to end. Free Palestine. And I was like, wow, this is a rabbi saying this. So there is a sect of Judaism which is very against what is happening. And there's a lot of them living in Israel, and they're being targeted, they're being harassed, they're being violently like pulled to the ground. And there's many videos of them kind of standing up and then being knocked down by like water cannons or,
So they're being treated like they were in Nazi Germany. Like it's just warped, isn't
yeah,
it? When
it's
you're
very
looking at it,
warped.
it's like, yeah,
It's very, very warped, especially Holocaust survivors
yeah,
being called like self-hating Jews or anti-Semitic for saying, no, I know what happened to my family and I see it happening again.
yeah.
It can't continue.
It's like
Yeah,
1984, isn't it? Or
yeah, it
whatever
is.
the word is. Like,
Yeah,
but yeah, I had that.
it's a head fuck, that's for
It really is,
sure. Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, but they are definitely some of those powerful voices. There's a Jewish actor that is calling everybody out. He's like calling out DJ Khaled, and I'm just
Oh,
like,
DJ Khaled, don't let's not get onto DJ Khaled. But I hope your listeners might have seen Mo Ammer's Netflix show. Have you seen it?
no.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm struggling to remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's all about his family. It's about him getting citizenship in America and being like undocumented for like 16 plus years and being a Palestinian living there and the like humor of it and the challenge of it and the love. It's amazing. So that is something to
We'll have
watch.
to put that in the link. We've got so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
things
It's a
to look.
comedy, so it really makes you laugh.
Okay,
And I think,
I have to
yeah.
watch that.
And there are people, one of the things I've done is remove myself from anyone who won't say something about this. So it's healthy for me to have a boundary to be like, well, I actually don't want to spend time with someone who's not willing to say this isn't okay. And that includes on Instagram and influencers and celebrities. I'm like, no, I don't want to go and see your film because actually you're standing with Zionists and I'm not willing to give my money. I think that act of like that energy exchange is powerful to be like, no, I'm not going to fund that. But what I am going to do is find a family in Gaza that needs some help and I'm going to put some money that way. I'm going to help a Palestinian business and kind of so boycott, but know what you do want to give your money to as well.
It's really powerful. Why? I've done a lot of soul searching with this myself, but
Mm.
why do you feel there is a reluctance to speak out about what is happening in Palestine?
Um, there's like it's like protect you can protect yourself if you're not going to place your head above the parapet. So let's say in a country like say you lived in South Africa, where it's really normal to see Palestinian flags and everything else, it'd be super easy to say, I support Palestine, this is wrong. In a country like the UK or US is even worse right now, or Germany, you're going against the mainstream viewpoint. So you're really making yourself very visible. Luckily, I don't have an issue with that. I never have. Um, but I think for some people it's really hard.
Mm.
And they can't understand why they should care because how is it connected to us? It's so far away. They don't really understand the role Britain played in kind of giving that land
Mm-hmm.
for the creation of Israel. They don't understand there's reparations to be made.
Mm-hmm.
You know, UK should be taking a very different position
Absolutely.
to, heal this what's happened for Palestinians for generations. Um, I think the ordinary person on the street just thinks, how does it affect me? But when you kind of do break it down and you talk about colonialism and what we've taken from people continuously as an empire.
But what's do because that is true, but then did you see how different people were with the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Oh yeah,
So everybody
yeah,
turned their flag
yeah,
to Ukraine, and at school there was an outpouring, and there was flotillas and aid trucks, and everyone was
yeah.
giving. And we took in next door, like our neighbours brought in some people, but then they went back to Ukraine on holiday, and then never came back because it wasn't that bad. And I was like, but why aren't we doing the same for Palestine? Why didn't we do
Mm,
the same for Syria?
mm,
And I've been really sitting, but I think it's the government line. The
mm,
government decided they were refugees and bringing them in
mm,
because there's a vested interest in that. But with
yeah,
Palestine, it's oh no, like it's just this,
yeah.
yeah,
Because it's normalized to support Ukrainians. That's accepted. The government actually made a visa scheme, paid people to
yeah.
house them, gave them places in school. When organisations have pursued that for Palestinians, they're told, no, there's no way, there's no route. And I do think there is something about race here
Mm.
because it's been normalised. Anti-Palestinian racism is normal. It's in our kind of
And
viewpoint
I
all the
can't even
time.
see the difference in anyone's skin. Like, I don't know if I'm just being really, when people say race, but
Mm,
like, like, I'm looking at my daughter and I'm looking at these little girls and I'm like, they
mm,
look the same because my
mm.
daughter's got really dark hair and dark eyes. So again, it's just
Yeah,
like, what is it? It just doesn't, I think you're right. There's definitely some racism there, but it doesn't make sense
yeah.
because my daughter and I was saying to her, don't you look like this little girl? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, wow, it's just,
I,
yeah.
I think it's years of socialization into these ideas or indoctrination with our education system of like how we portray wars. We tell a particular version of history. We don't talk about all the Palestinians that had to leave. We talk about, oh, brilliant, the creation of the state of Israel, because these poor people had this situation, which of course they did. But we don't talk about the ramifications of that,
Absolutely not.
or people never being able to return again, or, generational trauma.
Yeah.
We just don't, it's very narrow, very narrow. And in a way, my friend Sana was saying this earlier, that people don't like the powers that be don't want us educated. They
Mhm.
want our young men and women to go into the army and serve there for their country, but they're cannon fodder. They're like expendable. Yet, so this indoctrination has to happen. And it's all the way through school and college. And if we're not in a family that like maybe has different kinds of people come to visit or questions these things, then we just take something as that is true.
Yeah.
We wouldn't look beyond that. And it takes years, I think, to really
To,
understand that and unpick it.
yeah. No, you're right. I'm just thinking about my own little journey with all of this,
Mm.
unpicking all of it, and then I'm trying to teach my kids. I've been really teaching my kids and my daughters. She's like, Mum, I just feel really cold. She's only 8. And then I'm like, oh, have I told her too much? I'm like, no, because they just, they've been doing behaviour at school. And I'm
Yeah.
like, this is just messed up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Victory in Europe against what? Against Nazis. Okay, so we're going to celebrate that, but we're not going to look at the elephant in the room that it's happening again. And I'm just
Yeah.
trying to, if they're not going to do it at school, and I've done a few things, have you heard of this crocodile bombardilo thing?
No, what's that?
It's not good. So at school, they're all shouting it, and apparently, it's this Italian meme that is celebrating this crocodile, which is this plane that's going across and bombing children in Palestine.
Oh
And
my
apparently, other
God.
children are singing it. So I sent a message to the head saying, did you know this is because my son came home from school and said, they're doing this. I've done some research. And I was like, just those little micro things
Yeah.
around.
Microaggressions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's because subliminally that's given a message to the
Yeah.
children. And I'm like, I'm just not. But no, I know I haven't spoken out enough, and I haven't been, and I've really been sitting like, calling myself out with it.
Mm.
And actually, what more could I have done? And I think there is a fear of like being attacked, like,
Mm.
because if you say something and then just this whole, I don't know, it's just, yeah, just really interesting.
Yeah.
That maybe it's ancestral, but when you were saying about putting your head above the parapet and
Mm.
being like, when you really stand for something,
Yeah.
because how it's being played out is if you're standing for something, somehow you're against something, but
Mm.
that isn't. And now I've kind of come to, I think, where you've been for a long time is like, actually, I can't say that I'm a spiritual person or I'm for humanity and be silent. I just can't, because it's not okay. And
Mm.
I'm not, this is an attack on anybody or against anybody, but I have to speak up,
Yeah.
because if I don't, it's going to eat me alive. It's just not an integrity of who I am.
You have been living it. I hear that you've been living it because you know all these stories as we're talking.
But I haven't shared it.
Yeah.
I haven't turned that anger, I've internalized it
Yeah.
and allowed it to go dark within me, rather than what you've been doing is then doing something. And that's been the missing piece for me the last few weeks, is like, and I've shared on stories and I've done a couple of but
Yeah.
not enough.
Yeah. I hear you. But I just think great that you are today,
Thanks.
honestly,
Thank you.
because we're all like, I've lived this. My dad's Palestinian. I know these stories, and it still took me time to find how I would use this and turn it into some action. And every day is still a choice.
Yeah.
And some days I have to have a day off. Like, okay, I'm gonna have a day off today. I'm gonna get in the bath and I'm gonna like not look at any news today. Um, and even like there's not guilt anymore. I used to feel a lot of guilt,
Mm-hmm.
but there's not. I can go and have a nice time somewhere, knowing I can get up again tomorrow and continue. I don't even call it a fight anymore. It's just like being alive, and it's doing the good stuff together. It's really important, and I think people are more able to do that than they realize,
Yeah.
because it's like one conversation at a time, actually.
Yeah.
And if you do have that conversation with someone that day, that's amazing. And there's a lot of people that might be listening who are feminists and like he'll stand up for all kinds of different causes. Why should it be controversial to stand up for
Mm-hmm.
Palestinian women or children, the
Oh,
Pal
man.
or men? But they're like the Palestinian mamas, especially, I think about a lot, about them trying to grow a healthy pregnancy. Now they're like Agent Orange and the different things that have been used on the land mean there's defects. And then when they do give birth, there's nowhere for them to be looked after. So sometimes they're walking miles and miles and miles. And then those that are breastfeeding, the milk might have dried up because they don't have enough.
Yeah.
So it's like it. Someone said something today because I was in a workshop earlier at Newcastle University, and he said the battlefront is now going to be in the wombs of the mothers that come in the next generations. and he talked about Vietnam. And I'm thinking, yeah, like that land has been decimated. How much is there? Because they battle test on Palestinians. So they're testing all these new stuff. And what are we going to find in the future? We don't even, this is just like, this might be the tipping point for the public, but we're going to not find out for decades. Like it's not livable.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So then every day counts because every conversation we have and every little action we do means something. And I always, every speech I make at Monument or wherever we are, Haymarket, I always say, thank you for coming out. Thank you for everything you do. Every boycott, every purchase of a Palestinian product, every family member you have a chat with and where they actually start to get it. Because it's just is like this massive ripple effect. And we see it around the world. Like, saw Ethiopians like dancing in the streets protesting for Palestine. Look at the way Yemen's showing up. They've got millions on the streets.
Yeah.
They've stopped the ships, Israeli ships, like
They've been all
flipping amazing. And Spain has been really amazing, and South Africa. And there's so many countries joined the International Court of Justice kind of application where they're saying this isn't okay. So I see a lot of people waking up, and that's how I view it.
Yeah.
And I need to view it that way, and I frame it that way. And framing is powerful.
I see it as a battleground for humanity.
Mm.
Do you remember that Manic Street Preachers song? If you tolerate this, then your children will be next. And I follow a lot of Instagram accounts that are all, oh wow, we're in New Earth and doing this for Indigenous rights and ancestral. And I'm like, okay, but Palestinians were Indigenous people living on their ancestral lands, pretty much living in New Earth communities, and yet this is what's happened to them. Like, how can you be talking about something that's far off in the future? It's in the net. Like, if they can't exist, then they're not allowed to exist. What makes you think that these utopia, like, if we do not fight for this now, this is what's coming for us? And I'm not being scary or conspiracy, but like you said, they're testing it on them. What's next? Everybody said after COVID and coronavirus, oh, what's going to be planned next? Or we're still waiting for it. This is what happened next. They finished that. We all said no, and that there's this thing. It's like a cause and effect thing. So this is why the truth is always in movies. The people that run the Matrix, the world, the elite, all of that, they tell us what they're doing. It's like, when you go and wipe your bum in the toilet, it tells you certain brands. It's like, oh, it's cancer. That's because there's forever chemicals in that particular brand. So they tell us and they show us through media and through films and everything the truth of what's happening. And so by us not speaking up and speaking out about Palestine, we're therefore condoning it, and that's why science is complicity. And that's this is what I've really been grappling with the last couple of weeks. I was like, fuck. So with coronavirus, people said, actually, no, we don't agree with the mandates, we don't agree with this. And then it literally stopped, people were going to lose their jobs and everything, people came together. And I think it's the same thing. Like, if we tolerate this, fuck knows what's coming.
Yeah.
And we know what's coming.
And they're already coming because Keir Starmer's making that speech. Disabled people are having their benefits cut.
Yeah.
They're out on the streets too. LGBTQ plus situation with that ruling. Like, they're coming for all of us. So we need to stand together firmly. And I think the point you're making is a very important one. And I'm really glad you brought it up because we can't do a spiritual bypass on Palestine.
Yeah.
There are yoga teachers in Israel teaching yoga, calling for the killing of Palestinians.
What?
There is a woman that I saw this week making that message, putting that across, yet she's a yoga teacher. So I think we need to not go into the spiritual bypassing around this. I think we need to have accountability for people, and I know there's a lot of good people in this country that I've met personally that are going to hold people accountable. And that is so important. If there's no accountability for this, like you said, where does it end?
Yeah.
Where does it stop? And they are coming for different kinds of people now. And this is where we stand together and we lock arms and we say, no, you don't come for any of us, actually.
Not in our name.
Yeah, we're all together. and we
Yeah.
need to be standing firm together because, as you said, when Labour came in, people thought, oh, great, it's going to change. And then we actually see who's been given the money, what kind of gifts they've been having, and it the story like unravels really. And we're very lucky because we're here, we're free to something, we have agency.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we really place our head above the parapet, someone could attack us actually.
Yeah, of
They
course.
could claim we're being anti-Semitic, they could, but I've been doing it now for quite a long time. Nothing's really happened. And I think that we do have some level of safety here. We do have that, and so we can use that to our advantage and use the power
Absolutely.
of that.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I just want to finish. I think there's something like epigenetically in our, like in the Northeast, because in my shamanic training course I run, I talk about the history of like how we got to be here right now. And in the UK, there is this kind of nationalistic thing, and but what people don't realize because they wipe it from my history, I don't, you probably aware, but have you heard of the Harrying of the North that
I wouldn't
happened?
to Harry and the North.
So basically, what happened in Palestine happened to us. William the Conqueror, so the king's descendant, 1066. So he was like a Normandy Viking, and he was it Edmund? I can't remember. It was like one of the descendants of Alfred, King Alfred. Yeah, my history's a little bit dodgy with this. But he won the Battle of Hastings and he invaded and they marched and they kind of went north. But what happened when they got to York, around York, north of York, around there, they were still under Danelaw, so they were kind of living like Vikings. If you've ever seen any of the Viking series, and so when they tried to take York, they kept trying and trying, and they'd put up a new castle, and they just fucking burn it down. And so the resistance got that bad that William the Conqueror was like, no more. So what he did, I can't remember the exact year, but he basically, over the course of a few months, killed every single man, woman, and child from York to just south of Newcastle, so where I'm from, Middlesbrough. So basically, that entire place, that entire region was flattened. And you can kind of feel it in the energy. Not so much Newcastle. You can hear there's this like real spirit of, but they burnt all the cattle. Every single home was burned pretty much. And then what he did is he imposed his own. Have you heard this term, the landed gentry? So that comes from the Normandy landings. So the Duke of Annick comes from here. And what they did, they stole all the land from the people because back then they used to decide on who was the best person for the job. It wasn't, oh, this person has this land and then we give it to their son, even if they're not really good leaders. That was the beginning of the democracy we now have. So it happened to us first.
Interesting.
And so that what they then did with that, they used it as colonialism because then they did it against the Welsh and then they did it against the Scots, Culloden in 1746, and they exported them on the fucking world. So the beginning of this started here in the Northeast.
That's fascinating.
So that's why it's really important that we fucking reclaim our power because it started here in 1080 or something like that. And that's why I think a lot of us are so afraid because we are the descendants of those people that survived. But what did it take to actually survive?
Wow.
We had to subjugate ourselves on such a level. But it's in our blood. We somehow, survived that.
Wow, that is fascinating. And you said you can feel it.
I can feel it, difference in the energy. So I'm from Middlesbrough, and there, it's like, oh, it's terrible here. We're never gonna win it. There's like the grid is different. Whereas you come here, and everyone's like, yeah, we're gonna fight because they kept their freedom. I think what's the castle, Bamborough Castle. It still had like oh, I've forgotten his name, like Uhtred. It's actually, but it still had like an Uhtred that survived. So around, and a lot of people fled to Cumbria and Wales, and that's why The Welsh was it. The Welsh never ever gave up. That's why when I go to Wales, the Druids are amazing because they just never gave up. The
Mm,
Scottish, unfortunately, after Culloden, their whole way of life was eroded.
mm,
My ex-husband was Scottish, and I've got ancestry in Scotland, but the Welsh are just like no,
mm,
and they never stop fighting. Like I'm English. I'm really proud of being English,
mm,
but I'm not proud of colonialism. I'm
mm,
a Celt, really, because that's what we all are. We're Celtic,
mm.
and they make us fight each other, but really we are all Celts.
Then if you think about what happened with America and where the people that went to do that, and that we sent our prisoners to Australia, and
Yeah,
then they did that, and it's
yeah,
just,
trauma.
yeah.
This is why they killed the shamans first and the witches
Mm,
and everything because
mm,
they knew. So what happened in like Scotland and stuff? They were the people that had it done to them, but then they went and did it. It was just perpetuated.
mm. It's interesting because I think a lot about being the victim of the victim, especially with Palestine.
Yeah,
And I was reading about apartheid South Africa that the Afrikaans had had their own kind of massacres. There'd been something done to them before
yeah,
they then did. And so, yeah, it's being handed on and it's being handed on and handed on. And where does it end? And Israel has its fingers in a lot of different atrocities around the world, actually,
yeah.
including Western Sahara. Yeah, so that, and if when you look it up and you see the companies that are playing out in different ways, there's a lot of crossovers. And it's interesting you said about the Northeast because one example that stuck in my head from a colleague of mine in Northumbria, she does a lot of activism for Western Sahara and she works on divestment. So she'll contact companies and say, do you know that you are basically supporting the occupation of Western Sahara? And try to like shift their position. And she said that at Teesside Port, they saw the ship dock and they did their research and realised it was going to Western Sahara next, basically taking equipment to support the occupation. So they got in touch with Teesside Dock Port Authority and they said, we'll go away and do some research. They did and they said, right, we'll never let another ship for Western Sahara dock here.
That's
And it's like
amazing.
literally that simple.
Wow.
So there's great power, but I was born in Darlington.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And when I go there, there's like this,
You can feel the energy
yeah,
too. Yeah,
yeah.
from
I'm
there.
not so keen to go.
I don't know what anti-sad listeners will be thinking of it. No, I love it. My family's there, but you can feel it in the energy.
Yeah,
It's different here, isn't it? No, I didn't
yeah,
know you were from Darlington.
yeah. That's where I was born. That's where my dad settled
Wow.
because he had a friend there and went to college, met my mum, and I was like the first Palestinian child in Darlington. And there's all these race riots happening at the time because it was like late 70s. And he had to kind of live with all of that going on. He was so not welcome there.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
but when I visit, I mean, my grandma lives there, so I love to go. But I feel a massive difference. I feel different when I'm there. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, there is something in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. Because you don't, you, yeah, we're not taught this history. We're just taught, oh, the king, queen are great, and all of this, and
Mm,
like we're not taught all of that. I think it was back then. Actually, I don't know. I think it was like 50,000 people were killed, and back then it was massive because
the population would be so
so
small.
low. So it was
Yeah.
literally eradicated. And so there was just a few survivors, like a handful of survivors that fled. So that's why it's like Cumbria, Cymru. It's all like that there were
Mm,
the original. So the original Celts had to flee. They flew
mm,
to Scotland. And then when I was up in Loch Lomond, because I do a lot of grid work, so I work on the grids. This might not need to be in the podcast, but you can kind of like run light grids where there's been dark grids. And so I was doing this grid work at Loch Lomond, and I found that the original tribe that had been there actually fled after the William the Conqueror did. So they actually came from Sunderland.
oh my goodness.
And went all the way up to live on Loch Lomond and created their own clan and got but then they got killed after the Jacobite rebellion of Culloden. So like
Yeah,
they got
that's a
them in
lot.
the end.
Yeah.
700 years later they were still got by the same. But that's the thing, it's these same forces that
Yeah.
existed then.
Replicating.
Yeah,
Definitely.
same darkness.
We should say something about the Irish, because the Irish have been flipping amazing for Palestine.
Irish have been awesome. Yeah, should we end it with them?
Yeah.
I love, I love, but they're just so fucking honest, aren't they? They
Oh
just
my
cut
God.
through all the bullshit.
They've got this phrase now, a Palestinian. And I've got a friend who's Irish, and she'll send me, oh, she went to Ireland and there was like flags everywhere. And there was, and she's teaching her sons all about her own heritage alongside walking with us on the journey around Palestine. Because I do think if we're going to end on something, I would end on it's been the hardest time and the most beautiful time to reclaim my identity
Yeah.
from the depths of this kind of absolute darkness. I feel like I can feel my Palestinian blood, and I can feel this kind of drive to work for them and to work towards the future that I see them having. And I do really feel it in my bones that there will be freedom. Every colonizer's come to an end. Every colonizer has at some point. And I think that too much is now seen by the majority of people. So maybe people in power haven't yet changed their sail according to the wind, but the members of the public, as a mass group around the world, really get it in a way they never have. And I see like lots of people wearing keffiyehs, and I see loads of symbols of it everywhere. And yeah, I'm really, really hopeful for the future. And what I vision is a time when I can go to Palestine and enjoy being on the land and be with a family member and see one of the seasons, because the seasons are amazing in Palestine. Yeah.
Is that what is, if we can just end it with your vision, like what is your vision for Palestine and for the Palestinian people?
My vision is quite a simple one, because I don't think there needs to be anything elaborate. It's like children being safe, and mums and dads and children together enjoying their lives, being able to sing, being able to be in the sea, being able to harvest their own food, which they love to grow. And all of those people still there, they're all seeds. I really see what they're able to do in the face of so much. So just imagine when that freedom comes. And I really, really believe it's going to come. It may get harder first, I don't know. But I see a time when Palestinians can reclaim what they've lost.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you.